In the not too distant past, because now it's 2022, and I guess maybe like in the not too distant future as well, the WHO would come out and confirm that there was no person-to-person transmission of the Solanum virus. Unfortunately, that was completely botched, and we should forever and always laugh at the extreme level of incompetence put into 240 characters. Saltiness aside, this virus would spread through the population exceedingly fast. Likely beginning somewhere in Southeast Asia, such as South Korea, China, or potentially even India, the virus would cause entire cities to go dark quickly until reaching major transportation hubs where it would really start gaining ground. As it adapted to the human body, time of infection went from a couple of hours to mere seconds as it became familiar with the human body. But there may also have been other aspects which were not discussed, allowing it to more successfully subdue a person. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how the virus infects the people who are able to survive, and then also its progression as well as the summary, because this is 100% going to get struck down in like 12 minutes, so enjoy it while it's up. So here we are in the middle of an ad integration, and I finally found something to do while these things play. So currently I am building my main Rufus, and not the dog, but one of the heroes in the RPG Hero Wars. But there's more out there than just Rufus who uses a shield, with other heroes like King Mao and her dragon, Mojo and his Totem of Wrath, and with each hero having a cool set of skins that boost their stats. There's a lot of ways to level your heroes, such as completing missions to get rewards and equipment, coins, and soul stones, which can actually be used to get more heroes. All of this will give you more XP, which improves your skill as you level, and then you'll gain access to something known as guild mode, which then you can team up with friends to take on other guilds and titans. If all that sounds interesting, heading the link in the description or scan the QR code now, you can download Hero Wars. What I like most about the game is straight from the drop, you can play the campaign, which will help you level your heroes and gain experience, so you can pick the hero that you connect with the best. And considering there are over 130 missions and more than 50 different heroes, there's a lot to unlock. Plus, with the game being on both mobile and browser, you can basically play it any way you want. You can join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero, as well as 600 emeralds and 30,000 gold. You can scan the QR code up on screen now or download the game from the link below in the video description, and I'll see you in game. Okay, so for all those who watch all the time, you know the pattern, but for all those that are new, up on screen you'll see a timestamp. If you want to bypass the summary of the movie where I dunk on the WHO for a little while, head there. But it's important to remember that all scientists are giant nerds, myself included. For everyone else, let's get to the most unbelievable thing. A family happy early in the morning, eating breakfast together and laughing about how great their lives are. What even is this? It's like disturbing. Then again, I grew up with all brothers and a lot of chaos, so maybe that really says more about me. Doesn't matter though, let's get to it. We kick off our story with the opening card saying Plan B, because Plan A was covering the actual source material from the book, which likely would have been better. But they went with Plan B, which was to just slap the title of the book on the movie and then send it out, which if you didn't know, Max Brooks, who wrote the book, was asked what he thought about it after the premiere, because it was basically just a so-so movie, and he said he didn't really care because that wasn't even his book that was covered. It was just a generic zombie movie with the name of his book on it. Classic Hollywood. Okay, really opening up now. We get pictures of the landscape, animals, humans, infrastructure, and the radio talking about an outbreak of avian flu and a bunch of animals getting got by something, as well as climate change. You know, the real doom and gloom stuff we see every single day, so it's like if you're exposed to it all the time, how are you supposed to remain in a constant state of panic before you get exhausted? But as it goes on, more and more random illnesses appear to be spreading across the planet. And then now on to the most unbelievable scene. The kids jump into their parents' bed as they all laugh and have a great time and cook a giant breakfast as the kids actually like one another. We see the older daughter has asthma, wonder if that'll come up later, but as the dad, Jerry Lane, watches TV, we get some information about how martial law is being enacted in certain places far from their location, so why worry about it? We also see Jerry used to work in places where martial law was enacted regularly, but he quit to basically stay home and make pancakes. So like, I'm assuming they're well off and they can just do that, but like, what's the deal here? Everyone seems a little happy about the unemployment running pretty high in this family. Also, why is he still making pancakes? Everyone looks to be done eating. But the real question is, why am I feeling the need to dunk on this scene so hard? So we're just gonna move on. So it looks like they are heading to school, I'm assuming, as we have two grown adults in the early morning enjoying life, but as they enjoy their life, we see people running by the car while a cop rides by and then hits the side view mirror, smashing it. I think I'd be a little more upset, but they just sort of like write it off. Also, the radio reports of transmissions are coming through and oh, spooky. And now we get some random explosion in the foreground. Where did it come from? Who knows? That's the fun. Jerry gets back into his car as everyone begins noping out. A cop yells for Jerry to get back in his car and just basically sit tight, even though he was already doing that. And then he gets struck by a garbage truck. All right, so where did the garbage truck come from? This has always bugged the crap out of me. Literally half a second prior, there were a ton of cars parked next to him with no space for this truck. And within half a second, the garbage truck just appears, smashes through all those cars, and then takes out the cop. No, bro. The gridlock traffic would absolutely have stopped that truck, and also just the noise would have alerted the cop before he got hit. Luckily though, the truck now clears the path through tens of thousands of pounds of vehicles that Jerry is able to follow, and only Jerry follows. Now we get Rachel, she's just screaming in the back seat about a blanket. This causes Jerry to crash. I mean, kids are annoying. Then he exits the car, and it's chaos as you might imagine. Luckily though, a camper pulls up in Philadelphia for some reason. Like, what the name of all that is holy is that thing doing there? But the outbreak has begun. As they escape, Jerry watches one dude get bitten and is able to count off with the Big Ben the doll over there, seeing that it takes 12 seconds. He gets in the camper and takes off, and thank God the keys were in there. So apparently the military was already here for some reason, like the response time required, again, no way. But the eldest daughter begins having an asthma attack as they forgot her inhaler in the car. As they pull over, Jerry then calls Terry to see if he's okay, and apparently they just barely made it out and they are coming to get Jerry and his family. Also, apparently Boston is lost at this point. So now we move on to what is basically just your standard normal New Jersey store during an average shopping day. So the outbreak hasn't really hit here yet, and it's business as usual. Entering the pharmacy and grabbing some albuterol, an average New Jerseyan pharmacist comes out and asks what they need. He grabs it for them, and then Rachel starts screeching as a dispute happens over some milk, and Jerry is forced to take out the shopper. As an officer arrives, it looks like it's maybe not going to go well, but it's New Jersey, so he just grabs some diapers. Which, yeah, what a beautiful state. Jerry calls Terry as he runs with his family to nope out of there. A homeless man sits on the corner as all the infected pass him. The family then heads inside the building and breaks into a hallway. Another family then opens the door for Rachel as the rest of them run in. The boy offers some food, but Jerry goes over to the radio. There's an emergency broadcast saying basically you're on your own for about 2 weeks, Godspeed. Then goes on to mention the mystery virus is spreading and turning people. So the game plan now is to just chill out there and wait for it to pass. Jerry says though the family needs to come with them as movement is life, but the father declines, saying it's best to stay there as that's their best chance. So Jerry and the fam then head out the next morning while zombies break into the original family's apartment. That's why you don't talk during a zombie invasion. Heading into the stairwell, it's now just a mad dash to the roof because these things are like everywhere, like, sort of like 7 days to die during a blood moon. Jerry gets some of the zombie goop in his mouth and then runs towards the edge of the roof and then begins counting. Luckily though, it doesn't spread by mouth infections. Tommy also survived, but his parents are now gone. Sorry about the new orphan status, my guy. Jerry is able to hold off the infected as they all make their way to the helicopter and escape before being overrun. As they fly over New Jersey, a lot of it is destroyed and desolate, which again, I could make another joke here, but I think you already know what I'm gonna say. So they end up making their way to an aircraft carrier, which is holding survivors for the time being until they can get to a safe harbor. Jerry and Terry talk about if it's worldwide and if anyone is doing any better than them. But as it turns out, the president has already gotten got, the VP is missing, and 4 or 5 Joint Chief of Staffs are already gone, with battles happening in the streets of the capital. So I'm gonna say probably not. Nobody is doing that well either. Terry mentions how it spreads via airlines. Surely that would never happen in real life. So we get to this point where a bunch of nerds are arguing over where it came from. One guy then mentions how it has to be viral by how it spreads. Then another mentions zombies and everyone groans. So here's the thing. Being a former scientist myself and seeing the people basically turn into these things, I would be like, yeah, it makes sense, zombies, because it's a colloquialism. It's just what you call it. But oh no, the politics of science and zombies and basically a lot of scientists just don't like to have fun. But because zombie was mentioned, there was an email that originated from South Korea, so Jerry is being sent there to figure out where this thing came from so they can develop a vaccine for it. Dr. Fossbach, the guy who knows viruses, is going with them as he's there to figure out what's happening. Jerry then tells his wife that if he doesn't go, they'll kick them off the ship, so his hands are just a bit tied with this one. On the plane, we get some info from Dr. Fossbach. He mentions how Mother Nature is kind of a douche, but when she makes a disease, there are breadcrumbs which actually show the weakness. I'd like to see how this could be maybe applied to current times, but hey, whatever. Also, I like how people are being brought to the boat just to be told there's no room on the boat. Like, why would you bring them there? So now we are in South Korea at Camp Humphreys, but the plane is running a little low on juice. As they move out, they can definitely hear infected in the area. As a few run out, Fossbach gets scared and then runs back into the plane, but it's wet, so he trips and immediately domes himself. Whoops. Another team arrives to get them off the plane and back into a more secure area. And here we get some more info. Body shots seem to slow them down. Headshots will work, but they are attracted to sound. They discuss the email to which the guy in charge shows him a room. 15 or 16 guys got bit trying to handcuff one dude to a cot, but because they were infected, they lit up the room with fire. The colonel's hand, despite being completely ash, or at least the rest of his body is completely ash, is still moving, which is a bit peculiar. But one guy had a busted leg and was left alone and was able to shut the door and contain the infected. The guy who they were trying to handcuff was a field doctor. He actually went to confirm a soldier's end who went AWOL. People found the soldier crazed, black stuff leaking from his mouth, so they took pot shots, but nothing would bring him down. The field doctor then got infected after examining him. So now we meet Mr. CIA, who got arrested selling force multipliers to the North Koreans. As he talks about what he saw, he says all the teeth were pulled out of the people as they were aware of this outbreak before anyone else. Well, that's just a theory, because apparently Israel has already sealed off their country days before the attack even began. Jerry now needs to head to Jerusalem to figure out if it started there. Requesting a co-pilot, they are given bikes as it's faster and more quiet than walking. They shut off the lights and then head outside to fuel the plane to get it off the ground. So now Mrs. Lane here does some, like, one of the most dumb things imaginable. She calls her husband, who's in an active zombie territory, with a phone. Now, he should have silenced the thing, but common sense would probably dictate, hey, that's not a great plan, as you know. So I don't know, maybe he's doing something that requires his location to not be exposed. If this ever happens in the future, remember my words, don't call your spouse. So eventually they are able to get back onto the plane and get the thing fueled up and ready to go. The captain actually gets bitten in the process, so he just takes himself out before he turns. The rest of the group then enters the cockpit and leaves the back open, letting all the zombies fall out at takeoff. Jerry calls the next morning and handles it pretty well. I think I would probably just set down some ground rules like, hey, you know what? Don't call me, I'll call you. But as they fly along, potentially a nuke is set off in the distance, or possibly it was just a reactor going critical. Not actually sure. But they make it to Jerusalem and are cleared to land. Jerry now tells the pilot to stay in the plane and just be ready to bug out. So actually, contrary to popular belief, Israel isn't doing as hot as we were led to believe. As Jerry talks to the guy in charge, he mentions that they intercepted communications from an Indian general saying they were fighting the Rakshasa, or basically just zombies. He says the reason that they believed it immediately is because they have refused to believe in the past bad things could happen. So why not start believing that it could? This is based on the 10th man thinking that if 9 men agree something is right, the 10th man has a responsibility to think the others are wrong. But we see that people are being brought in from outside of the giant walls. But outside of those walls, it is absolutely inundated with infected. So people are pretty jazzed about being saved. So someone grabs a speaker and a microphone and then starts singing, which is brilliant. I mean, someone needs to get her to stop karaokeing because you're gonna have a bad time. Luckily, the infected are like ants and then start climbing over the wall to get over it. Wonderful. This causes their wall idea to fail, as infected are now climbing the walls and infecting people from inside the city. But we also see that one man is being ignored. It now becomes basically a sprint to GTFO towards the airport. While they run, a boy is completely ignored who appears to be suffering from some illness, likely cancer. In their escape, one of the soldiers is bitten on the hand, but before she turns, Jerry then cuts off her hand to stop the spread. He doesn't know if it'll work, so maybe just introduce like a ton of pain into her life before she turns, but it does end up working, and they are able to escape despite the helicopter that was sent to pick them up crashing. Oh, by the way, Jerry's pilot just nopes out of there like a real hero. Thanks, bro. Where's he even gonna go? But the soldiers are able to stop a Polaris Air and then get on the plane via a ladder coming down a hatch. Obviously taking first class seats, the pilots are trying to figure out where to go and just pick a point and take off. So Jerry now has to change the bandage on Segan's arm, but while he does, he begins thinking about all the people passed over from infection, which gives him a Jimmy Neutron brain blast moment. Jerry then calls his wife and asks for Terry. Terry is going to locate the closest vaccine facility while Jerry goes to talk to the pilot. They take the phone from him and are directed to Wales. As they go in for their final approach, a flight attendant then lets out an infected. So now the broke economy class is infected and first class begins putting up barriers to keep them back there. While they do, one of the scrubs drops a bag and then alerts the horde back there that they are up there. As a fight ensues, Jerry realizes it's basically over and tosses a concussive force distributor, which blows out the side of the plane. This sends the thing into what is essentially my absolute worst nightmare, and it crashes. Waking up injured, the first thing I want to tell you is never try to pull out what could be blocking a bleed. Segan comes over to him and begins limping down the road with him, what looks like a completely abandoned town, except for a grandma watching them from the window. Getting to the WHO facility, oh thank God we're saved. We now see at this point Jerry's family is taken off the ship as they assume Jerry is a goner. Terry tries to get them to stay on the ship as Karen angrily looks on. I mean, what can he do? It's not his fault. But anyhow, Jerry is taken into the facility after his wounds were cleaned and dressed, but he's handcuffed to the table as they don't know if he's infected or not. I like how they use this to sort of like frame the scientists as potentially dangerous when really they're just huge dorks. Jerry is told that he's been out for 3 days, then tells the dude to actually call the phone, which prompts Jerry to talk to Terry, who says that he's with the UN, so now he's all good. As Jerry's family was sent to a safe refuge camp, obviously Jerry's a little upset, but I don't know why he's angry, as that's not really that bad of a deal. Jerry then totally, puts his foot in his mouth and says, oh, the doctor can't possibly understand, which then the doctor's like, oh, actually I do understand because my son actually just got taken out by what was once my wife. Ooh, got him. That's why you don't be a dick for funsies. Jerry says though that he's looking for their worst disease. The doctors say the body functions are shut down in the infected, so any disease that they use really won't take them out. Jerry says it's not for them, but for the uninfected. He says the ones who get bypassed are the ones who are sick, so it would act as a sort of camouflage. Which it does make sense, as in nature, predators will avoid diseased bodies regularly, so that must be what's happening here. They mention what's the point if it's lethal, but surely you can cross that bridge later. Also, where they store the diseases is in B-Wing, which is completely infested with infected. All that is well and good, as it really doesn't matter, as this is actually their only option. Enjoying their nice jaunt through Zombieland, they of course end up making some noise once they enter B-Wing by not watching their feet, so it's off to a good start. As they move through, they end up having to dodge, dip, duck, dive, and dodge their way around the infected in the labs as not to be spotted, but eventually this doesn't work that well because they open the creakiest door imaginable, which activates the almonds of the infected to a much more alert status. But then the WHO doctor runs into a freaking filing cabinet, which then alerts everyone, as Segan then lets out a shot, which now the entire wing is aware of their presence. Jerry gets the infected to then chase after him rather than the other two as he heads into the vault and splits open his stitches, it looks like probably. The other two are able to make it across the sky bridge as they open it up and then get inside before the infected make it in. Jerry now makes it to the ultra super mega shouldn't be opened containment lab where they likely keep herpetogonosyphilides. As he goes to smash the window, he gets a call from a woman watching him on the cameras, which I have no idea why she didn't just tell him the code like before they even left, but whatever. So Jerry does something really stupid and leaves his crowbar outside of the door. Why? Because the plot demands it. I mean, no way I'm leaving my beaten stick anywhere except by my side. Grabbing a bunch of random diseases, he gets cornered by an infected because like an idiot, he left his crowbar outside. But you know what I see? A bunch of shelves with metal poles. Make another beating stick. But instead he injects himself with a mystery illness. A little while later, the infected looks around confused as it appears to not be able to smell him anymore. He lets it in as it wanders and completely bypasses him. The music is all like heroic, but who knows? He may have just straight up injected himself with HIV 2, which is worse actually than HIV 1. So real heroic, but anyways, as he walks out, his hypothesis is confirmed as the infected run past him and leave him completely alone. Then he drinks a Pepsi. Gross. So now humanity has its answer. Jerry is given a counter to whatever he injected himself with, and it looks like maybe it's respiratory based on the mask that the doctor is wearing who gives him the shot, so it does not probably appear permanent. So Jerry is then sent back out to Nova Scotia to be with his family. Then we get shots of humans fighting back using the vaccines as the counter to camo themselves against the infected. And man, this was nowhere near like the book, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, yeah, the book was actually leagues better. So I believe the first place we should start with is a designation. The book is way different from the movie, to the point that the two don't even appear to be related concerning events. With that said, it is still considered the same virus, which is known as the Solanum virus. To a degree, we can link the book and the movie together concerning history, but things obviously go a little awry concerning events of the movie and forward. So let's start with a little history, shall we? The Solanum virus is a very old virus that has plagued humanity for much longer than the movie suggests. The first evidence of its existence can be traced back to 60,000 BC in Central Africa, where 13 crushed skulls were found, along with some art depicting a humanoid figure with another human inside of its mouth. It would appear that shortly after we got up and started walking on two legs, the virus would begin targeting our species. Apart from that, the actual evidence in the universe of this virus dates back to 3000 BC, where the virus was first found inside the decomposed brain within a sarcophagus as an infected attempted to claw its way out of the sarcophagus long ago. Along with this are quite a few more examples ranging from 500 BC to the most recent example prior to the zombie outbreak being in 2002, when a zombie washed up on the shores of St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, but was put down by police fairly quickly. Then it all officially popped off between 2012 to 2024, before humanity finally got a hold of the situation and was able to actually stop the viral spread and put down the already infected. This, however, would result in roughly 50 to 70% of the Homo sapiens race being bodied and becoming shambling masses. Despite attempting to find the origins, which coincides with what happens in the movie, the actual source of the virus was never located. The clearest point of origin that had been worked out was in the Yangtze River in China, somewhere along the flood basin of the Three Gorges Dam. However, even with this point suspected, it is still not known if the virus is native to this planet or something extraterrestrial, as it seems to disappear for vast periods of time only to re-emerge and potentially destroy the entire population if not dealt with quickly, and it actually almost did. It would appear that the Solanum virus has plagued humanity for quite some time, but there are quite a few strange things concerning the virus overall that may hint at that it is native here, but humans are the target no matter what. Concerning cross-species interactions, animals will react in abject terror when coming across any tissue that has been infected with the virus. There is no explanation as to how they instinctively know to avoid this virus at all costs, but there is a difference concerning our species and other species on this planet, and it may actually relate to neural mass. Solanum is 100% fatal to any animal that contracts it. This could explain why animals on this planet will literally turn tail and run away from anything that may be infected. There is one species actually that will stand and face humans that have turned, and that is dogs. Since dogs have a strong bond with humans and are fairly integral integrated into our society, dogs will not immediately run when confronting the infected, but this does not mean, though, that they are not afraid of the infected. They do have a leg up, however, as they are typically ignored by any person that has been infected with this virus and can also outrun them for the most part, meaning that they are capable of scouting areas for infected movements. Most dogs will apparently fail this training, however, as their instinct is to run from the virus and it is too great for them to overcome. Despite it being 100% fatal, humans are the only species that will reanimate, and this is an actual true reanimation as the organs of the body are shut down from their original functioning. And this may imply that the infection pathway is heavily reliant on brain to body mass ratio. Basically, there needs to be enough brain tissue to allow for enough of the virus to propagate throughout the body, but not so much body tissue that the virus will not have enough time to properly saturate it, which we will cover here momentarily. So this is where the divergence begins, however, between the book and the movie. In the movie, it shows the infection taking place in roughly 12 seconds by the time it hits the United States. It was mentioned previously that when the outbreak first started, it could take upwards of hours for the infection to progress. Given the previous outbreaks of Solanum, this would indicate that the virus, upon being stopped, will return to its wild-type variant, but still remain highly infectious to humans under certain conditions. Then, as it spreads throughout humanity, each subsequent generation of the virus becomes more capable of infecting until it goes from the book, which can take upwards of a full 24 hours with varying stages of symptomatic display, to 12 seconds, which results in a seizure and then your infection. But the question then becomes, how does this virus spread and what are the effects to your meat suit? First thing to note about this virus is there is a very specific way in which the virus infects humans. If the transfer does not happen via a bite and instead saliva leaked into the mucosa membranes of like the eyes, mouth, or nose, this will not result in an infection. The virus appears to be very unstable outside of the host body and does not appear to have the ability to directly enter the bloodstream without the bloodstream being pierced. This may indicate that also UV radiation from the sun is incredibly damaging to the actual virus itself, rendering it inert if it is outside the body. So as long as there is tissue in the way, the virus cannot enter the body, which appears to be a little odd seeing as later the virus can enter cells forcibly and begin the infection process. That said, this does not mean you are 100% safe from meeting your end. Should enough of the matter enter your mouth and subsequently your digestive tract, the flesh is highly toxic to humans, which can result in your end. It's been noted that the flesh of those who are infected also decomposes much slower, even post-mortem, because the virus will attack any and all bacteria on the flesh and destroy it. Because of this, simply waiting out the infected may not even be possible, as even after months, they are still up and walking with little decay. This also is a direct result of the viral infection in other ways, but before we move on to that, let's talk about the viral pathophysiology, which will lead us to the mutations inspired by the viral hijacking of the cell. Just to recap, again, as the virus spread, it took hours for anyone to show symptoms, as this was the wild-type variant of the virus, and it wasn't as suited for human meat suits as it would later become through thousands of interactions. This is how the virus was able to spread across the planet, as someone who was infected and didn't know it would board a plane, bus, or train, go somewhere where they would ultimately succumb and begin infecting others who then didn't know that they were really infected either, and so on and so forth. By the time things really got kicking off, it was not hours, but minutes until getting to the US, where it would be mere seconds from a bite to their turning. Once entering the bloodstream of a person, initially the virus would begin circulating rapidly within the body. Initially, this took time, but the version shown in World War Z would take seconds as it bypassed the blood-brain barrier and beeline for the frontal lobe of a person. Here, it would replicate itself within the neurons, then burst from there, destroying them in the process. This is what caused the person to quickly lose control and all thought, as they would immediately turn on people around them. Considered to be a total loss of humanity, large portions of the brain are destroyed. However, I don't believe it to be just the virus causing this issue. To form a virus that quickly would require cellular production of the virus to be well beyond anything our cells are designed to do. Because of this, I believe that another component must be present. So we know that the tissue is highly toxic if ingested, to the tune of 100% fatal without reanimation. Because we know this, we can also surmise a few things about it. I believe that while the virus gets better at infecting people, I also believe generations down from the original patient, a toxin is produced that causes the person to seize once it hits the brain. This seizure would be likened to a grand mal, which may actually completely result in the person's end in those few seconds. After the virus is still saturating the area, it can then reproduce, but because their consciousness is knocked offline, the instincts take over. This toxin is highly potent as well, as we can basically see it destroying blood vessels all the way up to the eyes, where it causes massive damage to delicate structures, resulting in a type of blindness. This is what I believe is causing people to turn so quickly, because we see an example of how this may not be the case if you were infected further up the line. When the soldiers are attempting to make it to the plane to refuel, we see the captain gets bit. While he knows he doesn't have much time, he is able to to essentially have one last thought and still has the capability to pull out his force multiplier, answer another soldier, and then dome himself before he turns. Whereas the guy who is in the car who gets bit that turns, it's about 2 seconds later, he's already seizing on the ground. The differences based on geographical location and how many generations the infected has spread is important for symptoms. Because of this, I don't believe it's purely the virus, but the black substance that is dripping from the mouths of the infected, which is mentioned briefly earlier in the movie. Whatever this substance may be induces heavy seizures in the brain, firing all neurons at once and knocking you out. In that short moment, the neurons are destroyed in massive quantities concerning the frontal lobe, which completely knocks you out of the game permanently. However, your body is still out there, driven by one purpose, the need to infect. World War Z zombies are not driven by a need to eat or some innate hunger. Instead, like the virus that has infected them, whose only purpose is to infect, that becomes the infected's sole purpose, which makes them incredibly dangerous as they will run down anything on 2 legs that looks like a person. That said, there are several processes that each individual cell undergoes that also makes the survivability of the infected off the chart. Once the brain is subdued and the body begins attacking others, the infection does not just stop at the neurological area. The virus will begin entering other tissue to fully saturate the person as every cell is changed into something else entirely different. While not mentioned in the movie, we're going to talk about it here because there are so many great opportunities that the movie could have done, but alas, they didn't. As the virus creeps into other cells, each cell is altered and changed into its own different organ. Basically, take a multicellular organism and convert all of the cells working together into just a single-celled organism, and that's what the infected are. They are no longer a single person, but more likened to a hive, each cell operating independently from one another, but still part of the same structure. This has several effects on how the infected operate. Whereas non-infected need oxygen and our cells need to communicate to survive, the infected do not need any of this. Damage to 99.99% of their body can be negated and ignored. But something to remember is while body shots just slow them down and actually don't really damage them because the rest of the cells are working on their own, the brain still needs to send signals to these cells in order to contract muscle, at least to a degree. Now, we do see a discrepancy in the movie when the Colonel's hand moves despite the fact that he's ashen, but headshots do appear to cause enough trauma that the muscle cells will no longer receive information to contract. Either that or all the sensory organs that are in the head are just destroyed, so the infected no longer knows where to go. But all of this is to say that the cells themselves are basically still alive in the kernel as they are infected, and this is possible due to how the virus breaks the genetic coding of the cell. First, specific genes are broken which keep our cells working together. This in mind would be the easiest thing to do, seeing as cancer does this or has this happen all the time. Once the cell is broken from the influence of the body, the next thing to change is the actual metabolism of the cell, which is a lot more difficult. Think of the virus basically taking our metabolism and reversing it. Whereas we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, in that process, cellular respiration is conducted, which produces adenosine triphosphate or just ATP. After infection, it seems like the virus adds in information that changes the process to where the cells will secrete oxygen instead of carbon dioxide, but will still have ATP formation in order to keep the body running, or at least the single cell running. Obviously, this means that with little outside influence, the cells can remain alive as every cell is existing on its own producing oxygen. It may also be that oxygen is still used to produce ATP, just in smaller amounts, and the oxygen produced by other cells will feed surrounding cells to a degree. But the cell itself can exist off the oxygen it produces. This negates the need for sustenance concerning the body, which is why humans are not eaten, and instead they are just infected. Now, this is not a perfect process. Obviously, you can't just make energy out of nothing, so the body would become depleted at a certain point, and this can be seen with how the bodies are degrading. So eventually, despite their durability, they would drop simply because they would run out of energy production. But with the cells able to survive by themselves without the need for others, the oxygen needed for the body being provided to themselves on a cellular level, and the durability to resist decomposition as the virus will attack any organism attempting to decompose any cells and create infection, this means that the undead are extremely durable and would likely last for years in warm climates and decades in colder climates, as they just simply freeze during the winter and then thaw back out in the spring to continue their rampage of infection. All of this said, there is one glaring flaw that makes this disease not 100% capable, and it comes down to if an animal is worth infecting. For those that watch the movie or the summary, this is what happens when you have a previous ailment which may create a certain scent that is no longer desirable to the infected. We have seen several examples of this: the homeless man drinking who potentially may have cirrhosis, the old man walking around with some unknown ailment, the young bald boy who likely has cancer and is undergoing treatment, and the soldier with a busted leg, which may indicate some sort of skeletal issue like bone cancer. It seems like, sure, it's a sickness, but what exactly is taking place to cause the infected to avoid the sick. Well, surprise, surprise, everything your body does absolutely has an impact on you and by consequence, your scent as well. As a species, we have known for a long time that people who are sick just smell different. Sometimes it can be slight, sometimes it can be in your face, but that does inspire a response within us to keep our distance so that does not happen to our own meat suits and they get sick. Now, if we were just animals without larger brains, that would cause us to be like most animals and simply leave the person to their fate, which is readily displayed in the animal kingdom. But since humans are badasses and at the top concerning intelligence, we do take care of our sick and elderly. Because humanity is number one despite our propensity to be stupid. I blame that on being anxious, hyper-intelligent apes. But this desire to still be near the sick despite some portion of our brain telling us to keep our distance may have been over time dulling our senses to sickness. Other animals do not have this dulled sense and will leave another animal behind if sick or altered. This trait is why the infected will avoid those who are infected with something potentially because they're not seen as worth investing the infection process to, as they are repulsed by the scent of these people. When you have an infection, your immune system has a major impact on the way you smell. The first line of defense, known as inflammation, inspired by the innate immune system, is the first to begin altering your scent. This is done as simply as a byproduct of the action and not an intentional or desired response. Which actually, the interesting part about this is if predators keep their distance from a sick animal, when that animal is at its weakest because of the sickness, actually, now that I think about it, maybe that scent change is intentional to keep away predators while the body is weak in fighting a pathogen. At any rate, this causes chemicals to be produced that individually the hive organism infected will pick up on and avoid. This may also be working as a camouflage as it tricks the infected into thinking you are already infected as well. So it's clear that the innate immune system would begin responding to the Solanum virus immediately even after the infection has already won. This change in scent is how the infected know who's infected and who's not, which would also likely indicate that any illness or damage to the body would allow you to survive the initial outbreak. So by purposely infecting a person later and activating the immune response, this would allow the person to have this camouflage from the infected. But at some point your body would conquer the issue, meaning that you would need to keep introducing altered forms of pathogens into your body to have a constant immune response in order to remain hidden, which does not bode well for a long-term solution if you think about it.